Welcome to part 1 of the ultimate true crime iceberg, where we explore all forms of true crime cases, with a particular focus on crimes where the victims paid the ultimate price. The slaying of Michelle Lee. The case of Michelle Lee, a 26-year-old nursing student from Hayward, California, captured public attention when she disappeared on May 27, 2011. Michelle grew up in San Diego, part of a close-knit Vietnamese family, consisting of her mom, dad, and brother. Unfortunately, her mother passed away in 1999 after a multi-year battle with breast cancer. After graduating from high school, she pursued higher education, first at San Jose State University, before moving to Samuel Merritt University in Oakland, California, for nursing. Michelle was last seen at the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center, a facility associated with the university where she was studying nursing. The following morning, her vehicle, a white Honda SUV, was discovered parked nearby with signs of distress inside. Despite no immediate leads, her family initiated extensive search efforts, leveraging billboards and rewards for any information related to her whereabouts. The investigation intensified over the following months. Police initially suspected that the incident involved someone close to Michelle, due to the nature of the case. This suspicion led to the arrest of Giselle Esteban, a former high school friend of Michelle, on September 7, 2011. Despite Michelle's body not being found at that time, evidence was substantial. Bloodstains found in Michelle's vehicle matched those on Esteban's shoes, and security footage placed Esteban in the vicinity at the time of Michelle's disappearance. Further damning evidence arose from the tracking of cell phone movements, showing Esteban and Michelle's phones moving in tandem across Alameda County after Michelle's disappearance. The motive behind this tragic event was rooted in jealousy and perceived betrayal. Esteban harbored a belief that Michelle had interfered in her relationship with Scott Marasigan, with whom Esteban shared a child. Despite their relationship having ended years prior, Esteban's inability to move past her connection with Marasigan led to a growing resentment towards Michelle. This culminated in a meticulously planned attack, as Esteban tracked Michelle's movements and planned the confrontation in the parking area of the medical center. And to be clear, Esteban's belief was not rooted in reality whatsoever. Michelle had not had any relationship with Esteban's ex-boyfriend. More on this when we discuss the trial. On September 17, 2011, nearly 4 months after Michelle's disappearance, her remains were discovered in a remote canyon area, significantly decomposed, making the determination of the exact cause of death challenging. However, the accumulation of circumstantial and direct evidence was sufficient for law enforcement and the judicial system, and she was charged. The trial of Giselle Esteban was marked by dramatic revelations and a clear display of the consequences of unchecked jealousy and misguided beliefs. Prosecutors contended that Esteban was driven by a mistaken belief that Michelle was romantically involved with Scott Marasigan. Their theory, which was proven at trial, was that this led to confrontation and Michelle's slaying. Esteban's defense acknowledged that their client was responsible for Michelle's demise, but argued for a lesser conviction of voluntary manslaughter. They suggested that Michelle had provoked Esteban into acting in a moment of uncontrollable passion. However, the prosecution presented a strong case, illustrating that Esteban had been planning her actions for months. This included stalking Michelle at her workplace and generally tracking her movements. During the sentencing, Alameda County Superior Court Judge John Rolifson highlighted Esteban's apparent lack of remorse for her actions. He pointed out that throughout the proceedings, Esteban showed no sign of regret or understanding of the gravity of her actions. Ultimately, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, reflecting the severity of her actions and the irrevocable loss she inflicted on Michelle and her family. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was a notorious figure whose criminal activities terrorized California residents from 1984 to 1985. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez had a troubled upbringing, marked by exposure to graphic violence and substance abuse. His cousin, a Vietnam War veteran, introduced him to drugs and shared disturbing stories and images from the war, which Ramirez found fascinating rather than horrifying. This cousin, a decorated Green Beret, had secretly taken to committing illicit non-consensual acts against the local Vietnamese woman, and then brutally slaying them. And if that wasn't enough, Ramirez witnessed his cousin slay his wife in front of him. These early experiences, combined with a burgeoning interest in Satanism and criminal behavior generally, shaped the horrific path Ramirez would follow. If you've watched my other Iceberg series on unsolved mysteries, you know that Satanism and the Satanic Panic often come up, and in the 1980s, it seems that every crime had a theory about a potential satanic tie-in. Well, that wasn't the case here. All evidence suggests that Richard Ramirez was a legitimate and unironic Satanist, but I'll get into that in a moment. Ramirez was not academically inclined or well-guided, and dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Prior to moving to California, he worked at a Holiday Inn, where he initially started using his access to rooms to rob patrons. Unfortunately, this isn't where he stopped, and his actions at this Holiday Inn became extremely depraved. I won't go into the full details, but let's just say he would commit illicit assaults, regardless of age, foreshadowing his future behavior. For reasons which aren't clear to me, despite committing these unnatural acts, no charges were pressed against him. Ramirez moved to California in 1982, where he continued his extremely heinous activities. His first known act as part of the Night Stalker serial slayings occurred in April 1984, with a brutal and fatal attack on a 9-year-old in San Francisco. Notably, this case was not tied to the Night Stalker serial slayings until decades later. It wasn't until the ending of 79-year-old Jenny Vinso in June 1984 that the quote, official spree began. Ramirez's reign of terror over California would last for just over a year, with over 15 victims falling to his axe. Throughout his reign of terror, Ramirez displayed no clear pattern in choosing his victims, which ranged in age, gender, and location, adding to the public's fear. He committed his crimes predominantly at night, breaking into homes to assault and brutalize the inhabitants. His actions were characterized by exceptional brutality, and he often left satanic symbols at the crime scenes, further heightening the public's fear and the media frenzy. The intense media coverage and public fear led to a massive law enforcement effort to capture Ramirez. The breakthrough in the case came from forensic evidence. Ramirez left behind crucial fingerprints at a crime scene, which, combined with eyewitness accounts, led to his identification. In late August 1985, Ramirez was the top story across California news outlets. However, he was completely oblivious to this. Despite the manhunt on for him, he unknowingly evaded the cops by getting aboard a bus for Tucson, Arizona, to spend some time with his brother. However, when he arrived in Tucson, his brother wasn't there, and being none the wiser to the manhunt, decided to return to Los Angeles. On August 30th, 1985, Richard Ramirez returned to Los Angeles from the failed visit to his brother, bypassing police at the bus terminal. How did he give police the slip? Well, he didn't do it intentionally, but they were only checking for outbound buses. Unsurprisingly, the authorities didn't think Ramirez would be trying to enter LA. In East Los Angeles, a very heavily Hispanic part of the city, He realized his identity was exposed when he noticed people in a store screaming and recognizing him as, quote, El Matador from the news. Quick aside, this name might be associated with bullfighters in English. However, in Spanish, the name just means killer. Panic-stricken, Ramirez fled, resulting in a chaotic sequence and an attempted carjacking. Local residents intervened and detained him after a chase. The police were alerted and arrived to arrest the severely beaten Ramirez. In 1989, Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of ending lives, 5 attempted endings of lives, 11 illicit assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to face the death penalty in California's gas chamber, to which he responded with indifference. Despite his apparent indifference, he launched an endless series of appeals to delay the ending of his life. He died of natural causes in 2013, never having faced the execution that was ordered for his crimes. Also, in a bizarre postscript to this story, Ramirez married Doreen Leoy, an editor for the once-renowned magazine for teen girls, Tiger Beat. Amy Harwick, Amy Nicole Harwick, born on May 20th, 1981, was an influential figure whose life and career left a lasting impact on many. Harwick dedicated her life to helping others navigate the complexities of relationships and intimate affairs. Her journey into the field of psychology was marked by determination and hard work, including her time as a Playboy model and dance performer to fund her education. Harwick eventually earned her PhD and specialized in family and, quote, intimate health counseling, making regular appearances on various media platforms to share her insights. In 2014, she released a best-selling book on intimate health for women. Harwick's personal life also garnered public attention, particularly her engagement to comedian Drew Carey, which was announced in 2018 but amicably ended later that year. The events leading to Harwick's tragic passing on February 15, 2020, unfolded under horrifying circumstances. Harwick was discovered in a critical condition beneath the balcony of her Los Angeles home, leading to her death in the hospital. The investigation revealed a struggle had taken place, with Harwick suffering from injuries consistent with a fall from a height, further compounded by blunt force injuries to her head and torso. These injuries were later confirmed by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office to have contributed to her death, which was officially ruled a homicide. Gareth Pursehouse, Harwick's ex-boyfriend, became the central figure in the subsequent legal proceedings. Harwick had previously sought protection against Pursehouse, with 2 restraining orders filed against him in the years leading up to her death. Despite these measures, the threat Pursehouse posed remained, culminating in his arrest and charge for the events leading to Harwick's death. His trial began in August 2023, and by September, Pursehouse was convicted, with a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole handed down in December of the same year. Lake Bodom slayings. In the early hours of June 5, 1960, a chilling event unfolded at Lake Bodom, near Espoo, Finland. 4 teenagers, Mila Irmeli Björklund, Anja Maki, Seppo Antero Boisman, and Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, embarked on a camping trip that ended tragically. The group set up their tent along the tranquil shores of Lake Bodom, expecting a night of camaraderie and outdoor adventure. However, their peaceful retreat turned into a nightmare when, between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., an assailant attacked, resulting in the deaths of Björklund, Maki, and Boisman. They were subjected to a brutal assault involving stabbing and bludgeoning, while Gustafsson, the sole survivor, was found with serious injuries and fractured facial bones. Early reports suggested a sighting of a mysterious figure, described as a blond man, seen leaving the campsite around the time of the incident. The crime scene, discovered by a passerby later that morning, revealed a disturbing scene. The victim's tent collapsed, with evidence of the violence that had occurred spilling out onto the lakeshore. The investigation into the incident was marred by significant oversights from the outset. Critical errors, such as the failure to secure the crime scene promptly and the mishandling of potential evidence, hampered the police's efforts to identify the perpetrator. The mysterious nature of the crime, combined with these investigative missteps, led to widespread speculation and numerous theories about the identity of the assailant. Over the years, several suspects have emerged, each with their own compelling, yet ultimately inconclusive connections to the case. Among them were Carl Valdemar Gillstrom, a local kiosk owner known for his animosity towards campers. Yes, you heard me right. The guy who sold goods to tourists at the camp had a deep hatred for campers. Talk about choosing the wrong profession. Another suspect was Hans Assmann, who exhibited suspicious behavior and was seen with blood-stained clothes shortly after the incident. And quick aside on Assmann, this individual was a person of interest in 5 other slayings and confessed to at least one on his deathbed. Despite various leads and extensive investigations, no conclusive evidence was found to definitively link any suspect to the crime. In a twist over 4 decades later, the lone survivor, Gustafsson, was arrested and charged with the slayings based on allegedly conclusive forensic evidence. Gustafsson had never been named as a suspect, or even a person of interest. The prosecution suggested that a drunken altercation between Gustafsson and his friends led to the tragic events. The forensic evidence against Gustafsson centered around several key pieces of evidence that, according to the prosecution's theory of the case, implicated him in the tragic events of 1960. According to the prosecution, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence was the discovery of the victim's blood on Gustafsson's shoes. Additionally, the prosecution claimed that these shoes were found hidden away from the crime scene, suggesting a possible attempt to conceal his involvement. Another piece of evidence that the prosecutors claimed worked against Gustafsson was the nature and extent of his injuries compared to those of the deceased. Prosecutors argued that the pattern of Gustafsson's injuries could suggest a scenario in which he engaged in a confrontation with his friends, leading to a deadly escalation. According to their theory of the case, the absence of Gustafsson's blood on the shoes was also seen as significant, suggesting that his injuries occurred after the murders were committed, possibly in an attempt to fabricate a narrative of being another victim. Despite this evidence, the court ultimately found it insufficient for a conviction. The acquittal was based on several factors. Firstly, the forensic evidence, while suggestive, was not conclusive. It could not irrefutably prove Gustafsson's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's interpretation of the bloodstains and injury patterns was challenged by the defense, which argued that the evidence could be interpreted in multiple ways. Additionally, the defense highlighted the significant time gap between the incident and Gustafsson's trial. They suggested that the forensic analysis could be flawed or incomplete due to the degradation of evidence over time. The court also considered the lack of a clear motive and the possibility of external involvement. This was amplified given the complexities of the case and the initial mishandling of the crime scene, which could have compromised the forensic evidence relied upon. Ultimately, the court decided that the evidence presented did not meet the stringent standards required for a criminal conviction, leading to Gustafsson's acquittal. In my view, the trial against Gustafsson, over 4 decades after the Lake Bodom incident, raised significant concerns about the fairness and viability of pursuing a conviction. One critical argument against proceeding with the trial was the extensive time lapse between the incident in 1960 and the trial in 2005. Over such a long period, evidence can degrade, witness memories fade, and the integrity of forensic analysis can be compromised, making it challenging to establish facts with the required level of certainty for a criminal conviction. Moreover, the initial investigation's mishandling, including the failure to secure the crime scene and the loss or contamination of potential evidence, further undermined the reliability of any evidence presented decades later. Additionally, the absence of new, unequivocal evidence against Gustafsson and the speculative nature of the forensic analysis presented by the prosecution highlighted the speculative basis for the charges. Without a clear motive, definitive physical evidence directly linking Gustafsson to the crime or new witness testimony, the trial appeared to some as an attempt to close the case rather than a pursuit of truth based on solid evidence. This combination of factors suggests that the trial against Gustafsson may have been more about seeking closure for a case that has rightfully embarrassed Finnish police. As a result of what I would call a miscarriage of justice against Gustafsson, he was awarded 45,000 euros for this ordeal, which was paid to him by Finland. Jimmy here, the dude behind the Lazy Chill Zone channel. If you're enjoying my content, please do me a huge favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons and that sweet notification bell. Also, consider signing up for a YouTube membership, joining the Patreon, and joining the Discord. Bela Kiss. Bela Kiss was a Hungarian serial slayer, born in 1877, who gained notoriety for the gruesome discovery of over 20 bodies hidden in metal drums on his property in a suburb of Budapest after his disappearance in 1916. Before his crimes came to light, Kiss lived as a tinsmith, presenting himself as a respectable, though solitary figure in the community. Around 1912, Kiss began placing advertisements in newspapers seeking lonely women, seeking a fortune teller to improve their love lives, or seeking financial assistance. His screening process seemed to focus entirely on women who were either financially destitute or had no one to miss them if they went missing. This is a common tactic amongst these predators, and it allows for them to continue their heinous acts for longer. It is during this period that he committed his slayings, deceiving and then ending his victims, whose bodies he preserved in alcohol within sealed metal drums stored on his property. Kiss was called up for service in World War I in 1914. In 1916, during a planned renovation of Bela Kiss's rented property, the landlord discovered 7 sealed tin drums containing the bodies of female victims. The authorities were called, initiating a horrifying investigation that would reveal the full horror of Bela's activities. Kiss, having joined the war effort in 1914, was absent, leading to speculation about his whereabouts. The authorities discovered a total of 24 bodies at Kiss's residence, revealing a gruesome pattern of serial killings. Investigators discovered books on poisons and strangulation, along with the victims' bodies preserved in alcohol and drained of blood, suggesting that Kiss might have practiced vampirism. Efforts to capture Kiss were complicated by his common name and the uncertainty of his status as possibly deceased or a prisoner of war. Over the years, there were numerous sightings of him across the world, including in the Turkish army, in Serbia, and in New York City, but none were confirmed. The Hungarian police and later law enforcement officials in various jurisdictions pursued leads without success. The mystery of his final whereabouts and fate remains unsolved, adding to the infamy of his crimes. My hypothesis on this one is that Bela Kiss likely saw or heard of a newspaper report describing his crimes while he was on the front, and deserted at that point, leaving behind his old identity. Supporting this hypothesis, an individual in the French Foreign Legion was identified as potentially being Kiss. However, this individual deserted the Legion prior to investigation and was never found. That said, the French Foreign Legion, especially at that time, was full of suspect people who may need to desert at a moment's notice. Alternatively, 2 years passed between Bela Kiss's enlistment in the Austro-Hungarian army and the finding of the corpses. These were, to put it mildly, not easy years to be on the front, and it's very possible that he perished on the field of battle, contracted a fatal disease, or died in a prisoner of war camp. The slaying of Brenda Thurman. In January 2016, the case of Brenda Thurman's death in Spokane Valley garnered significant media attention. Initially classified as accidental by the Spokane County Medical Examiner, her husband, Dwayne Thurman, a former Lincoln County Reserve deputy, stated he was cleaning his wife's firearm when it discharged, leading to her fatal injury. Dwayne was subsequently charged with first-degree manslaughter, but a jury found him guilty of second-degree manslaughter instead. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison in relation to this charge. I note that it is important to remember that second-degree manslaughter generally covers situations where someone acts recklessly in a way that they know could cause death. However, they do not actually intend to cause death, and as such, the penalty associated is much less than for the intentional slaying. The incident has been fraught with complexities and differing perspectives, particularly from the family of Brenda Thurman. Brenda's children, Gabrielle and Michael, provided accounts that cast doubt on the accidental nature of the shooting. Gabrielle, present in the house during the incident, recounted rushing downstairs upon hearing the gunshot and finding her stepfather with her mother, expressing regret. She questioned Dwayne's immediate actions post-incident, highlighting a lack of emergency response measures consistent with their military background. The Thurman family, including Brenda, had a history in military service, which magnified questions around the handling of firearms and emergency procedures. In 2022, the Spokane County Medical Examiner reclassified Brenda's death from accidental to homicide. However, the conviction and sentencing of Dwayne Thurman to 5 years for second-degree manslaughter had already occurred. Legal limitations related to double jeopardy prevent further criminal charges against him in connection to Brenda's death. As such, despite this reclassification, the case cannot be revisited. Hitoshi Igarashi. In 1991, the literary world was shaken by the tragic slaying of Hitoshi Igarashi, a Japanese scholar and translator of Salman Rushdie's controversial novel, The Satanic Verses. Born on June 10, 1947, Igarashi was a respected figure in the field of Arabic and Persian literature and history. His career saw him translating notable works and teaching comparative Islamic culture at a respected university in Japan. Igarashi's work on the Satanic Verses placed him at the heart of a global controversy. The novel, published in 1988, was accused of blasphemy against Islam, leading Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini of Iran to issue a fatwa in 1989, calling for the slaying of its author and those associated with its publication. This declaration set off a series of violent reactions against individuals linked to the book, culminating in Igarashi's untimely death. In 1990, while Igarashi was giving a talk about his translation of the book, he was assaulted while on stage. On July 11, 1991, Igarashi was found deceased in his office at his university, with wounds inflicted by an assailant who remains unidentified to this day. The motives behind this act have been widely speculated upon, with connections drawn to his translation of Rushdie's work. The widely believed assumption is that this case was related to his translation of the Satanic Verses. However, the evidence for this is solely circumstantial at this time. That said, circumstantial evidence does not mean bad evidence, and circumstantial evidence can be extremely strong depending on the circumstances. However, it is of course entirely possible that someone with a personal grudge against Igarashi used the controversy over his translation of the Satanic Verses as a smokescreen to end him. This hypothesis is just pure guesswork, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support it. The police have neither named any suspects nor named any persons of interest in the case. Despite the passage of time, the case remains unsolved, and the statute of limitations on the case expired in 2006 without any resolution. As an aside, I note that Japan has now abolished the statute of limitations for capital offenses. However, this does not apply retroactively, and the individual responsible for the slaying is free to come forth today. The Bigfoot Killer. From February to October 1975, a harrowing series of crimes unfolded that would leave an indelible mark on Detroit. The perpetrator, dubbed the Bigfoot Killer, an unidentified assailant, embarked on a brutal campaign of violence, targeting young women engaged in paid companionship. This serial killer, whose moniker was derived from his notably large feet, was responsible for the essay and slaying of 7 victims, their ages ranging from 16 to 22 years. The Bigfoot Killer's modus operandi was chillingly methodical. He preyed upon vulnerable women, luring them with the promise of money in exchange for services. Once they were in his grasp, he would resort to violence, wielding a knife to intimidate and control his victims before committing unspeakable acts, and finally, strangulation. Witnesses and surviving victims described the perpetrator as a muscular, tall African-American man, aged between 30 and 35, with distinctive facial hair and an afro. The investigation into these heinous crimes was fraught with challenges. A key suspect emerged in January 1976 when Carl Mayweather Jr., a 29-year-old Detroit man, was arrested during an attempted crime against a woman. Mayweather had a prior record of assault and seemed to fit the physical description of the Bigfoot Killer. Despite these initial suspicions, Mayweather was ultimately cleared of involvement in the Bigfoot killings, as he had solid alibis for virtually all of the slayings. Further, given that all the endings were committed by the same person, his solid alibis for most, but not all slayings, was sufficient. The community's response to the killings was one of outrage and desperation. Activists and residents, frustrated with what they perceived as police negligence, organized rallies demanding action and accountability. Their criticisms centered on the authorities' reluctance to acknowledge the severity of the situation and their failure to protect the community's most vulnerable members. Further, they criticized the extreme lack of resources which were assigned to the case, despite the severity of the ongoing attacks and the danger posed to some of the most vulnerable in the community. Unfortunately, despite attempts by the community, this case went cold, and it doesn't appear that it is being actively investigated in any meaningful way. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Remember to leave a comment below if there's a case that you want me to cover on this series. Also, once again, if you enjoy my content, please consider donating via Patreon or signing up for a YouTube membership. The topics I cover can lead to demonetization of my videos, and with your support, I can be less bound by self-censorship. Shout out to my patrons Noah Schubert, Kazak Cutie, Kurt the Squirt, Monoxide Wendigo, and Jeffer Metcalf. Also, big shout out to YouTube member Jordan All. Until next time, stay safe and healthy. Peace out.